Name, please.
Victor T., middle name Terhune, Eklund. Spell Victor, V-I-C-T-O-R. Terhune is T-E-R-H-U-N-E, my mother's maiden name, and Eklund is E-K-L-U-N-D.
Okay, Victor. And if you could tell me the unit that you served with in the 10th Mountain Division?
The unit I served with overseas was I Company 86.
And in training?
In training, I started out with B Company of the 87th at Fort Lewis and at maneuvers down in California. And then when we came off of maneuvers to Camp Hale, I had orders to go to Benning. And when I came back, they put me in the 86th I Company. And I remained in I Company until I was wounded.
And what was your highest rank served in the 10th?
First lieutenant.
Tell me a little bit about how you came to be in the 10th. I understand that you didn't start in the 10th.
Right.
How'd you come to be in the 10th?
I was in San Francisco in the Coast Artillery and saw a notice in the paper about a slideshow program free someplace in town on my day off. So I thought that would be interesting to see, so I went down. And after the program, it was put on by the Sierra Club. After the program, the secretary of the Sierra Club, who had been in World War I, saw me in my uniform, of course, and so he came over to get acquainted, see how it was going in the Army these days, and he wanted to know if I ever had a chance to do any hiking. And I said, no, not in the Coast Artillery, but I'd like to. And he said, well, he'd be glad to pick me up on days off when we go climb Mount Tamalpais or someplace like that. So we did that several times. And then he told me that, of course, working with the Sierra Club, he told me about the fact that they were going to set up some ski troops. And did I like skiing? Oh yeah, I love skiing. So he said, well, you have to have 3 letters of recommendation. So he said, I'll write 1 letter for you, and I'll get Dave Brower to write another, and then one other fella. That'll be your 3 letters, which happened, but nothing happened right away. Not till after Pearl Harbor, and I'd forgotten about it almost. And then the transfer came through, and must have been about March, and transfer read, transfer to Paradise, Washington. And when I went to the railroad station, the fellow said, there's no such place as Paradise, Washington. So he sent me to Fort Lewis, which was to Tacoma, which was ended up in Fort Lewis, which is where they were because they'd just come down off the mountain. I missed all the fun.
Rats.
Too bad.
Tell me what was in your letters of recommendation.
I don't know. I didn't get to read them.
Rats.
I should have written my own.
What would you have put in it?
Oh, I tell them I had done a lot of skiing. That my brother and I made our own skis in manual training class, and of course it wasn't the kind of skiing they were looking for. It was hills and in Iowa and later in Michigan. But
now you obviously got to know Dave Brower a little bit over time.
yes, he ended up in the same battalion that I was in, and he remembered me, and we became better acquainted.
What can you tell me about Dave Brower? How did he tend to inspire people?
Well, he was a really dedicated outdoors person, and he inspired people to climb, to ski, and so on, and learn what a wonderful what a wonderful sport it is. And
Did he influence you in any way?
well, in a way he did. I knew that he worked with the Sierra Club, and I became a member after I got out of the Army. And it was a coincidence of sorts. The fellow that I met at the first meeting, who was the secretary of the Sierra Club at that time, he was an outdoor type person, and he came up to the whole ranger station, Olympic National Park, when I was there, and I noticed his name on the sign-out sheet for hiking up the trail. So I waited for him to come back, and we renewed our friendship again.
Tell me a little bit about what did Camp Hale do for you?
It really made an outdoors person out of me. I mean, I've been crazy about mountain climbing, skiing ever since. And it inspired me also. I found out about the National Park Service. And while we were in Colorado, I happened to visit Rocky Mountain National Park one day. And as things sometimes work out, another officer in my battalion was had been a park ranger at Rocky Mountain before the war. So I was talking to him about the National Park Service, since he was familiar with it, and he told me, well, after the war is over, you should go to school at Colorado State, because that's called the Ranger Factory. That's where everybody goes. So I kept that in mind, and so after the war, GI Bill, I went out to Colorado State, took forestry, and it just so happened at that time, my friend Ernie Field was chief ranger at Rocky Mountain National Park. I don't imagine that had anything to do with the fact that I was able to get a summer job while I was going to school for 2 summers.
Tell me a little bit about what experience at Camp Hale in training you enjoyed the most during D-Series. What did you enjoy the most?
I enjoyed being out in camping every night and traveling through the snow, and I found it very enjoyable. It was cold, but we were used to that. We no longer used our mountain tents because they were not practical. We'd just dig a hole in the snow and lay some branches down out of a fir tree, and down out of the wind, we're perfectly comfortable in our sleeping bags. So I found the whole experience quite enjoyable. It was tiring. It was not stressful, but hard work. I mean, a lot of cross-country skiing and deep snow and very cold. But I found it enjoyable. I thought it was like being on a vacation almost.
Did you think it was work or play?
Play.
Did you feel guilty about that?
No. Yeah.
Did you have a sense that the 10th Mountain Division was special?
Oh my, yes. I think the whole outfit had that feeling about it.
Even at the time, did you feel like you were about to make history?
No, I didn't go that far. It was just a good outfit to be in, and I was glad to be an officer. I think a lot of the officers in the 10th were guilty of associating with the enlisted men, which was verboten. I mean, not allowed. But one weekend I took 2 enlisted men from my company, and we went deer hunting down in Colorado. And the first and last time I ever went deer hunting. But we got 2 deer and brought them back, had them for in our mess hall at camp to chew on.
Being an officer, did you have an opinion on, is it easier to make a good soldier out of a skier, or easier to make a skier out of a good soldier?
That's an interesting question. I think it's easier to make a good soldier out of a skier.
In what way?
Well, if you can ski, then you're all set. You don't have to fool around falling down all the time and so on. And if you're already a soldier, then you're used to outdoor activity, and even in the Coast Artillery, I guess, I'd get outdoors some days.
What were the challenges of trying to turn some of the skiers into good soldiers?
Well, a lot of them were very independent, and they took a different view of the Army. I was and spent several months. Took basic training in Coast Artillery, was part of the Coast Artillery Battalion in San Francisco. And I got used to the Army's ways and so on. But coming in with your 3 letters of recommendation, I think some of them got the idea maybe they were just going to go skiing the rest of their Army career and not want to pay attention to the other things we had to do. And but by and large, most of them would do what they were supposed to do.
It's a little bit like herding stray cats, wasn't it?
Yes.
Can you think of any examples that they were similar?
No, I can't think of one right now. No, I can't think of an example.
Tell me a little bit about the special camaraderie that the 10th had. Especially between officers and enlisted men. That's unusual.
Yes, and the Army found on it. I'll tell you 2 instances that I were involved in. One, the same Bob Sanctuary, he wanted to go skiing, and I was going to go skiing for the weekend. My wife and I, we lived up at Leadville at the time. So I said, well, I'll pick you up and we'll go skiing at Aspen, which we did, and we had a good time skiing. And they had an old funny tow, which was a boat, 2 wooden boats, and they would pull one wooden boat, everybody jump in with their skis, sit down. And as this boat was being pulled up the hill, the other boat was coming down, you see. It was a seesaw arrangement. And for some reason or other, that didn't catch on. So they thought the type of tows they have now is much superior, unfortunately. But the other incident happened when we first arrived overseas. We were in Naples and settled in this building, which is awfully cold, marble floors and walls and everything. And I received my first liquor ration. Gave me 2 bottles of scotch. Well, I was not a drinking man at the time. I never did drink in the Army. So I thought, well, I'll put these to good use. So I went down to where my platoon was camped in this building for the night and called my platoon sergeants together and told them I had these 2 bottles of scotch. They'd be welcome. Maybe they could find a use for them, and which they said they would be glad to. Then the next day, I got a notice. Someone told me that the battalion commander had decided that in the future my liquor ration would be kept in battalion headquarters to be used for entertainment purposes. So they found out what I had done about sharing my liquor ration, which of course was verboten. The enlisted men could have beer, but they weren't supposed to have hard liquor, you see. So that was the end of my little sharing the good stuff. I didn't have any more good stuff to share after that.
Even if you'd wanted to.
Right.
Go back to training. Can you think of any other memorable experiences that you want to share, funny or dangerous, or anything unusual during training?
During training, no, it was just an interesting experience in Colorado. It was pretty dull at Fort Lewis, and because it was all flat land, we didn't get back up to the mountain. We had an interesting exercise down in California, a maneuver, and in some miserable country. A lot of brush and stuff we had to crawl through. But Camp Hale was good. It had good terrain, good snow, and it was an enjoyable experience.
How would you explain to me what the first lieutenant of a weapons platoon does?
Well, the weapons platoon in a rifle company, and I company was a rifle company, we have 30 caliber machine guns and 60 millimeter mortars. They are all portable, although the people that have to carry them would probably debate that point. But they would share the load, so to speak. And the idea was that we would put these weapons into position prior to an attack, such as at Torraccia. And then when the attack started, we would be shooting machine guns at positions ahead of us up on Mount Torraccia, and we'd be firing mortars rounds up toward the German positions. And then if I hadn't been wounded, well, then we'd eventually moved up onto the top of the mountain when it was secure and been in a position to defend against counterattacks with our machine guns and mortars.
What was your assessment of German artillery? Did you ever have the sense that it was superior?
We heard that the machine guns were better, better quality, easier to manage and carry around and so on. And so I never had a chance to try any of them to see if they were any better, but that's the word that we got, was that they were much better than the ones that we had.
When you sat through a counterattack, can you describe for me what it felt like to be on the receiving end of a counterattack?
No, to be truthful, I didn't get to the top of the mountain. And so my men in my platoon went through it, but we had about 30% casualties on that Mount Torraccia.
Well, how about if we start by saying exactly what happened to you at Torraccia? Do you want to preface it by saying how you did an 86I walk sort of along the flank of Belvedere? Do you want to go through the whole progression of how you got there?
Yes, because I went up Mount Belvedere with the 85th as a liaison officer between the 85th battalion that I was assigned to and the 3rd Battalion of the 86th, my battalion, because my battalion was in support of the 85th. And I had a radio man with me, and any time the battalion commander wanted some support, he would let me know. I would tell the radio man we'd call for support. We never had to call for support, but it made for an interesting experience because I was with the battalion commander because he was the one that was going to tell me when he needed help. And when you go with the battalion commander, it's much easier than if you're out in front leading your troops, because everything was quiet. We walked up the mountain, didn't get fired upon. Saw a lot of dead, wounded people around, German prisoners being marched back and so on. And we got up on top, and there was an artillery observer laying on the ground and with his radio, he was calling in information to his artillery battalion, where to fire, and so on. About that time, there was quite a collection of brass there, you see. And here came an officer, probably a colonel, from the artillery. And he looked down at the forward observer and said, let me have your radio a minute, son, and your maps there, and I think I'll call in the next round. So he looked at the map real quick, and he called in coordinates for the next strike. And then he said, well, round on the way. So everybody was looking out in front, ready to see the round hit and see where it hit. And still looking, and one of the GIs standing there said, it just hit back of us about halfway down the mountain. Now, I don't know whether the artillery guys did that on purpose or not, but it was very embarrassing to the colonel. He gave the radio back to the forward observer and walked away.
Do you think that was intentional?
Pardon?
Do you think that was intentional?
Well, it would have been interesting, but it probably wasn't. He just gave them the wrong information.
Who was your colonel?
Well, that was an artillery colonel. I didn't know who he was.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, I stayed with the 85th for another day or two, and then I went back to my own company because we were getting ready to make the attack on Mount Belvedere. So during the night...
Belvedere or della Torraccia?
Excuse me, della Torraccia. So the night before our attack, we had to move in and take over from the 85th that was there. And we were going to use their foxholes. But they had been shot up so bad that there were not enough foxholes to go around. And I remember sharing a foxhole with our company commander. And then in the morning, everyone got in position. I got in with my men on one end of the attack line, and the other part of my platoon was at the other end. And the attack started. It was a lot of rounds were coming in, and the first thing I knew, my mortars and machine guns had been knocked out, people wounded, killed. So I thought, well, I better go up and tell the company commander what's happened, and then I'll go down and check on my other half of my platoon. So I'd start up toward the objective, and I got about halfway up, I guess, and there was a big explosion. I suppose it was an artillery round, blew me down, and I remember a medic coming by, and I asked him to pull me into a shell hole where it'd be a little more protected. He put a bandage on me, and that's the last I remember. Afterwards, after the war was over, I went to a reunion and met once again a doctor from the aid station that treated me when I was wounded, and he told me what had happened. After the war, after the objective had been taken and everything quieted down, someone late in the afternoon was bringing some prisoners down. They saw me, it must have been one of my men, they saw me lying there, and they had told the prisoners to pick me up and carry me down to the aid station, which they did, and there they were able to, the doctor told me they brought me back to life, so to speak, with hot water bottles and so on. Got me breathing. And
was there snow on the ground?
yes. Mm-hmm.
Go like. So you had actually been laying on the battlefield wounded for how long?
I think till about 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock.
And how many hours was that?
That was from about, I suppose, attack probably jumped off about 8, so probably from about 9 o'clock until maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
That's a long time. What were you thinking during that time?
I was didn't remember a thing. I was out. I didn't come to until I ended up in, not the aid station, but I ended up in they moved me from the aid station after they got me alive again, back to a hospital set up in an Italian house.
What was the nature of your wounds?
Shrapnel wounds in my shoulder, which resulted eventually in losing the lower half of my left lung, and it sort of disabled this shoulder pretty bad. And so I ended up as a, what they call a disabled veteran. They wouldn't let me go back to my outfit because of my wounds, and that's why I got left behind.
Was your lung collapsed as you lay there on the battlefield?
Well, I don't know what it was. I think the lung had been injured by the shrapnel that was inside.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to operate, when I finally got back to the hospital in Pistoia, they had to operate to take some more shrapnel out. And
Which doctor was it that worked on you in the field station, in the collecting station?
I can't remember his name, unfortunately.
Was it Meineke?
No,
Wasn't Meineke.
I read Meineke's book, but he was an assistant to Meineke.
Right. Did you have the sense when you knew that the 86th was going to pass through the 85th and attack della Torraccia? You had seen what had happened to Stone's 85th men.
Mm-hmm.
You knew that the Germans had stiffened up. You knew it was a tough go, or you wouldn't be passing through them. What exactly were you thinking, knowing all that? Or what did you know, actually? Let's put it that way.
Well, all I knew was that we were going to attack in the morning. I had to get my men in position at the proper time. And it didn't bother me that we were going to take this mountain. I felt invincible. And when I was wounded, it was a shock to me. I said, this is not possible. And so I think maybe that's what keeps people going for a while. If I'd have survived the first day in actual combat, maybe it would have been different. But going into it, I think you have to think that you're going to get through, or you wouldn't even be so dumb as to start.
Did you know what had happened to the 85th on della Torraccia?
Yes.
And what did you think about that?
Well, I think they had run out of steam because they'd lost so many men. They didn't have enough men left to make a proper attack when they got to della Torraccia. We were brand new, had not seen any action to speak of up until that time. So we were raring to go. And we, as the battalion, we did a wonderful job, I think.
Tell me what the point was of capturing that whole Mount Belvedere massif.
My understanding is that they had to take Riva Ridge, which controlled Belvedere, then take Belvedere, which was next in line, in order to get to Mount della Torraccia, which was close to the highway which goes to across the Apennines to that city on the other side. But anyway, that was the controlling part. In other words, they had to take Mount della Torraccia because that was the whole object of this particular military operation, was to seize control of Mount della Torraccia, and that way enable to have control over the highway.
I believe that highway led to Bologna.
Yes, to Bologna, yes.
That's right. Once you were injured, what happened to you next? You were taken back to...
Well, initially down to aid station down bottom of the mountain.
Do you have any recollection of that?
No, I didn't come. I was still out. I don't recall anything until we finally got to the aid station that was in the little Italian house. And then I came to, and they were taking me into the room where was the operating room. And of course, by then I'd lost most of my uniform, you know, it was taken off. And in order to fix me up to get me that far. And of course, my hair, I guess, was blonde at the time. And the doctor, I remember him saying, it's another one of those krauts, or he called it Tedeschi, because that's the Italian name for the Germans. He said, it's another Tedeschi, just lay him over there against the side of the room there, and we'll get him after a while. Get to him later. And I said, I'm not a Tedeschi. I reached in and grabbed my dog tags and showed him. Oh, he said, oh. So he laid me on the operating table and fixed me up. So I was ready to go back to the main hospital in Pistoia.
Well, that's a good thing that you had the
dog tags, yeah.
Yeah, enough energy to whip your dog tags
yeah.
out. Could you talk? Did you ever have any experience with surrendering Germans?
No, not the actual surrender part. No.
How about if I have you talk a little bit about this unique position you were in, since you never came back to the line company, but you did work with prisoners of war after VE Day.
Yes.
Maybe you could talk about that. That's really unique.
Well, they put me on limited service, and so I went to what we called a repo depot, replacement depot, and they assigned me to this prisoner of war camp, which at the time was over near Pisa, in the same field in the woods where we had camped when we first arrived at Leghorn and set up camp in what we call the King's Forest. Well, here we were with pup tents full of prisoners with a barbed wire fence around, and then we eventually moved to a bigger operation closer to Lucca, and then I had two compounds of prisoners. One was German, several thousand Germans, and the next compound next to it was about the same number of Italian prisoners.
So you were a little outnumbered there, huh?
Yes, but it was an interesting cultural thing. First of all, I didn't like the idea of being in the prisoner of war business. I told the commander when I reported, I said, I don't think I do a very good job here. I said, my older brother was killed in the Battle of the Bulge, and I can't stand the sight of all these Germans. And he said, it's the best thing that could happen to you. He says, you go ahead and try it a while, see if I'm not right. And he was right, because I found out these Germans were just like we are. They were in their army, we were in our army, and they were not the worst type of Nazis and so on. So it was a learning experience for me. The other learning experience had to do with the culture of the Germans as opposed to the Italians. When I'd go into the compound of Germans in the morning to make my inspection, the minute I walked through the gate, someone would call, Achtung! Attention. The whole camp would stand at attention. I'd tell them at ease, you know, and then they'd all quiet down. And they had the whole place organized. There was one fellow in charge, and we gave them food and camp stoves that we had, those little metal stoves to cook meals in the field. We gave them a stove like that and some food. They took one of the stoves and made an oven out of it with mud. They built an oven with the stove at the bottom and a door, so they put the bread inside and closed the door. And they baked the most wonderful bread. And I would get a roll when I'd go in the morning. And so then I would go from the German camp and go over to the Italian camp. I would go in, Nobody was in charge. Everybody was talking at once. It was just sort of chaos. And it was just the nature of the Italians. And so it was a good lesson to me on culture of the different races.
Did you have a sense that the Germans were happy it was over?
Oh yes, yeah.
What was your sense?
The fact that they were easy to work with, that they weren't trying to escape, and they just seemed to realize that it was all over, and now they hoped they could that they made it this far, and they knew they'd eventually get back home.
Is there anything else that you want to make sure you mention before we finish up in the next couple minutes?
Yes, one other thing about the prisoner of war camp. The Italian camp, as I mentioned, was a little different. And one night we had the 92nd Division, which was black soldiers with white officers, very bad combination. They were doing the guard work on the camp, on the prisoner of war camp. And one night there was a big fracas, and we found out in the morning that these GIs, the black soldiers, were selling escape to the Italian prisoners if they could scrape together some money that maybe they'd been able to hide. But there was an argument between this black soldier and one of the prisoners. Maybe he wouldn't pay the money or something. But anyway, the black soldier cut the Italian guy's throat, killed him. Well, they got rid of that particular group of soldiers. They brought in the 92nd, no, the 442, the Japanese. And when they were there, they were in charge, and we had no more trouble with any of the prisoners.
Vic, does it mean a lot to you to have been in the 10th Mountain Division?
It means an awful lot, because it was a pathway to my profession in the Park Service, and I've had a very enjoyable life after the war, and it's been a good life.
How do you define the spirit of the 10th?
The same spirit we have in our monthly meetings. Everybody felt like they were part of something great, and they knew they had good training, and they were doing things they liked to do, and a wonderful esprit de corps, lacking in so many of the outfits I know.
What do you think are the ideals or the values of the 10th?
I think it shows the necessity of having trained mountain troops. And I'm glad they have the fellows at Fort Drum. I just wish they were located in a mountain somewhere. Doesn't have to be Camp Hale, could be some other mountain area. But they're doing a fine job, but they are more versatile than we are, because they can rappel out of helicopters. We would have been glad to do it if we'd had helicopters.
Do you feel like that you have sort of blazed a trail for them in some way?
I think we have, that we are some type of inspiration to them. I think they got a pretty good idea of what we did in the war, what we accomplished in a short time, and our training. And I think they want to show that they are just as good as we were, and I think they are.
What do you think is the value of recording all these memories for preservation purposes?
Well, it's a bit of history that should be written, and I think this approach that you're taking is doing a much better job of getting everything straight and as it actually happened and so on.
What kind of legacy does the 10th Mountain Division leave?
I think they're leaving a legacy of that they were the first mountain troops in the United States. They were more than ski troops, they were mountain troops. And skiing, as you know, when we finally got to Italy, didn't amount to much. And so I think the start of mountain troops in the United States Army is long overdue. We had all the examples in Europe to look at if we just bothered to look, but we didn't seem to pay attention. So I think our legacy is being the first.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I can't think of anything right now. I think I covered all the bases pretty well, maybe too well.